Hello and welcome to today's ICMI webinar. We're very glad you've joined us for our panel discussion today, Blended Intelligence, Keys to Evolving from Contact Center to a True Customer Experience Center. I'm Tim McElligott. I'm the Editorial Manager and Principal Analyst at ICMI, and I will be your host for today's session. A couple of housekeeping announcements before we get started. If you have any technical difficulties during today's session, simply hit F5 or Command R. That will refresh your browser window. If you need further assistance, please click on the yellow help icon below the slides and somebody will get right with you. We do encourage you to ask questions at any time during our discussion. To do that, simply type your questions into the Q&A window on the side of your screen and hit the submit button. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we have time for. Additional resources, if any, related to this discussion can be found in the resource list widget located in your console. Those will be downloadable. And finally, today's presentation will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live event, and you'll receive an email reminder once that does become available. Thank you very much to Cognigy for sponsoring today's discussion. And with that, let me go ahead and introduce our panel. Sebastian Glock is Senior Technology Evangelist at Cognigy, whose focus lies in mediating between AI technology and business strategy. With deep knowledge in conversational AI, he advises top-tier companies in Europe and North America, and can often be found speaking at international conferences and events about digital transformation, customer experience innovation, and contact center AI. Roy Atkinson serves as CEO and Principal Advisor for Clifton Butterfield LLC, a business advisory practice, and is one of the top influencers in the service and support industry. In addition to many other lists, in 2020, he was named one of the top 50 customer service experts of the decade by Nextiva, one of the top 150 global customer experience thought leaders and influences of 2020 by Survey Sensum, and one of the top 10 CX contact center influencers you need to know or need to follow by Shelf. And finally, Phil Burgess. Phil is the CEO and co-founder of Clever Insight. In his long and distinguished services career, he and his team have won numerous awards for service excellence. Phil is the author of The Ultimate Customer Support Executive, a longtime supporter of ICMI, and a past chair of the HDI, our sister company, Strategic Advisory Board. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you very much for helping the ICMI community explore these really critical issues today. Let's get started with a brief definition of blended intelligence. So when we talk about blended intelligence in the contact center context, we're talking about what are typically considered human-in-the-loop augmented intelligence systems. These are hybrid systems that combine human intelligence and computational horsepower to collaboratively attack hugely complex and open-ended problems, and to help us decide on the strategies we can use to understand and solve these problems. To optimize the benefits of blended intelligence in the contact center, it's critical to understand the strengths and the limits of each of those, and to optimize our organizations and our systems to take advantage of the best of both. And thank you, gentlemen, for assisting me with that definition. And since we're agreed on that as our working definition of blended intelligence, I think it's important for all of us and for our audience to understand where are we now when it comes to blended intelligence in the contact center. There are a good number of contact center organizations that are at a comparatively mature place in creating a blended or augmented workforce. Those companies are already leveraging the best of AI, task automation, and human skills like empathy, understanding, nuance, and creative response. But if we take a broader view, right now, those organizations really do remain a minority. I'm going to start with you, Phil. From a 10,000-foot level, where do most contact centers stand today in terms of effectively implementing blended intelligence?
Thanks, Tim. I like that definition, and I like the way you've described how humans and computers work together. I think most contact centers and support centers are frozen at the starting line. We're trying to figure out what to do. We're just coming out of this global pandemic, which stretched our people to the limit. And many people are leaving for less stressful and high-paying jobs elsewhere. So you've got this tension of need to automate more to make up for all the changes that are happening, and people that are leaving and are now under stress because they feel their jobs may be going. And I think between those two, you've found more people, I think, paralyzed at the very start line. But as you've mentioned, the people that have gone past the starting line are really making tremendous strides as they learn and adapt to know how to work in this new world.
Great. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate that. Roy, what's your 10,000-foot view of where we stand with blended intelligence in the contact center?
Thanks, Tim. I think contact centers are making headway in this area. As Phil said, those who have started are making headway. And some are a long way ahead of others, but organizations are beginning to see contact centers as part of their overall customer experience initiatives more than just a way of providing customer service when something goes wrong. And once that emphasis begins to shift, it becomes more of a priority to get the best of both humans and AI engaged and optimized so that there's more capacity to take on that customer experience responsibility.
Great. And Sebastian, we'll end that with your 10,000-foot view, where we stand today with blended intelligence.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. As a contact center AI vendor, we also see a vast spectrum of maturity levels when it comes to blended intelligence. So some are just starting with self-service, intelligent IVR, and they are quite a bit away from blended intelligence. So for them, the most important mission is really to define and build those interfaces between AI and human workforce. So it's about intelligent routing, defining handovers, and all of that. Others have taken first steps into implementing blended intelligence, and they are offering some sort of agent augmentation. And that's typically, first of all, something like a warm handover so that agents are prepared when taking a call or a chat. Sometimes it's a whisper agent with knowledge base access or suggested replies to save some typing, for example. At that other end of the spectrum, we do see some really advanced contact centers. Typically, it's really large-scale enterprise contact centers who have optimized their processes for decades and decades, and now they're looking for very specific improvements, but they are limited by the technology that they have been using. So they take a best-of-breed approach and look for more tools to go beyond where they are today and go beyond and expand transactional use cases in more agent augmentation tools, for example. So there's a wide range of maturity, but the good news is that on every level, there are still significant opportunities to improve and differentiate from competition.
Great. Thank you all for setting the stage. Sebastian, I'm going to stay with you here. From a solution provider's perspective, what are some of the primary people, process, and technology challenges that contact centers face in preparing for or beginning to implement a blended intelligence strategy?
Yeah, Tim, those challenges, they really correspond with the maturity level. So for companies, and many are at the beginning of that blended intelligence journey, I think it's really about three aspects. So the first challenge is understanding where to start and realistic expectation management. We do hear over and over again that many decision makers are almost overwhelmed with marketing messages, promises, and amazing stories about the wonders of AI. We've all heard them. So it's important to really cut through the noise, prioritize, and get started with well-defined, measurable use cases. The second challenge is getting the right buy-in and commitment from leadership, because blended intelligence is not a project. From an IT perspective, it's really a product. It's not going away. And that needs to be reflected in the org structure. And the most successful clients we work with, they have built centers of excellence around those initiatives. So they bundle everything in centrally organized units, which manage the initiatives, and that creates huge synergies and speeds up time to success. And last not least, and that is related, it is building the right teams. Blended intelligence and also conversational AI is by definition very, very cross-functional. So you need input from your best human agents. You need IT in the boat to connect legacy systems. You need conversation designers or UX specialists. And it is really as horizontal as you can think from an organizational perspective. So you'll need the right people to help you. Just one final word on the other end of the spectrum. For the really advanced organizations, it's much more about managing complexity. That becomes a challenge the more advanced organizations are and the more ambitious they are. There's more to integrate, more to connect, more to scale, and that is really something where also the right tools make a huge difference when it's about being successful at scale at a high degree of complexity.
Yeah, and Roy and I had a conversation with some other friends of ours recently about that, and you know, one of the terms for it is decision intelligence, right? So that's another way that some of these tools can start to help. And I digress a little bit. Sorry about that. Phil, what are you encountering as you're assisting your clients to think about the value of empowering teams with blended intelligence?
I think one of the most common things I've got to remind people about is just how to think about blended intelligence or augmented intelligence. So we got to remember that both humans and machines serve vital but very distinct functions. Machines are great at many, many things, crunching data, cutting through noise. But what humans are really good at and likely to be good at for the foreseeable future are things that involve judgment, creativity, and leadership. So for example, while AI is getting better than human doctors at making accurate diagnoses of diseases, which is a great thing for all of us, they're not particularly good, and I don't think anybody's using them to actually talk to patients on their prognosis with the same care of empathy as humans. Here's how you should think about approaching this problem, right? It's just a clinical yes, no, these are the facts. Mm-hmm. So when we step back again, when we look at the traditional trio that we look at, right? People, process, and technology, we add three other dimensions, and that's leadership, culture, and measures. And I think all three play a huge part as people think about blended intelligence or augmenting their work with blended intelligence. So on the culture side, I think, are you a company that is command and control? Or are you one that really looks at a knowledge-first approach? A knowledge-first approach is as distinct from a case-first or a purely customer-first approach. Look not just at the effort for the customer, but what about effort for employees? And that's one very underlooked at measure that good blended intelligence can help out with, right? So it is not just a matter of saying, I searched for a solution, I found 20 answers. That's, at least I found the answers. That's a big step from many companies where you're going to knowledge that spirals within silos. Second step is, okay, I found 20. The next sort of evolution of that is, I found 20, but here are the two that actually, this paragraph, this line that makes the most sense. And I think today most tools stop there. But with blended intelligence, and if managers pay attention to the next level of detail, you can reduce that employee effort and make it simple and joyful to get your work done. And in that specific example, it would be, I found two articles that may help you based on other people like you that have looked at it. This is what they chose. But then the next step would be, how do I fix that knowledge gap? How do I teach the machine or teach the human that of the two, either this one or a variation of this one is the best answer for the next time? So it's that knowledge gap, I think, that blended intelligence can use the best of both. The judgment and creative of humans, leadership willing to make mistakes and say, yep, we tried this, it didn't quite work out, our data wasn't good. And this culture that says all of us know better than any one of us.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that is a critical issue that does sometimes get a little bit overlooked, is that we shouldn't be applying these tools only to directly to improve the customer experience. We also have to start looking more and more carefully at the agent experience, the employee experience. Great stuff. Roy, on the same general topic, are there misconceptions that a lot of organizations may have to overcome as they head down this path?
For sure. I think, and Sebastian touched on this, a lot of organizations are operating under misconception that working with AI is plug and play. They don't understand the amount of data required and the amount of ongoing work to maintaining and improving the systems, which is not to say that this is mountainous, but it can be more work than you anticipate when you start hearing about the magic of artificial intelligence. And some of these misconceptions start to vanish when the capabilities are put into terms people understand. Many of us deal with AI assistants, for example, through Alexa or Siri every day. So we're asking those AI tools for assistance in finding things or in buying things. And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, augmenting our own ability to find and articulate and solve. And these systems are now available to contact centers, and they're not totally dissimilar to those basic tools, but are configured and trained for the specific purpose within the organization and its customer ecosystem. So a lot of tuning may be required, but it all starts with decisions by the organization. So people, process, tools, trilogy comes into play yet again.
Yeah, great. I'm going to stay with you, Roy. When we're thinking about some of these more mature contact centers, can you give some examples of how the most effective contact center organizations are currently using technology to empower or augment human ingenuity? And what are their selection criteria as they're going down there?
But one example that jumps out at me is a CEO who asked about the ability of AI-powered analytics to provide information from recorded contact center calls. Every contact center has hours and hours and hours and hours of recorded calls. There's no way for humans to plow through that all. But AI can really help do that. He was asking specifically about the number, frequency, and sentiment of customers who mentioned their competitors. So this is very useful information, right? They wanted to provide that data to the sales teams for assistance in overcoming customer objections and being proactive in addressing these points. So that's contact center data being used in other parts of the organization, utilizing the abilities of AI and AI-powered tools to plow through that data and make sense of it. Another contact center reports greatly increased accuracy in providing solutions if the agents have AI-assisted, whisper coaching, assisted knowledge management, so their answers can be not only faster but also more accurate. As far as the selection criteria, they tend to be fairly distinct depending on the organization itself. But most organizations are looking to solve some similar problems. They want to find out how they can scale the kind of experiences they want to give their customers without spending a ton of money on increasing headcount. They want to provide seamless experiences across channels so that the customers don't have to repeat everything multiple times, or they call in 2 days in a row and everything is totally different. They want to have consistent experiences, and they want those experiences to be consistent with each other and with their brand promise. So it really starts with how do things fit with the way we do business and what makes the most sense from our standpoint in terms of a tool that will work. Of course, cost is a huge driver, but speed and ease of implementation are also really, really important in terms of selection.
Great. Sebastian, what are you seeing in terms of examples as you're working with some of the more mature clients?
Yeah, maybe first about the selection process.
Sure.
The mature clients also have one thing in common from my experience. At some point in the past, they have burnt their fingers with failed initiatives and broken vendor promises. It has happened to almost everybody out there. So what we see with the more mature clients is that their selection criteria, when it's about technology choices, they get much more solid, and they demand for proof of capability rather than sales slides and storytelling. And so that means that these days, almost every selection process includes a POC specifically to the client's use case, and that is often tested in production. So they, direct 1%, 5% of their production volume through a vendor POC only to make an evaluation to be safe on the long run. And I think that's clearly a best practice of decision making to me. About those most effective strategies, I think, and we do recommend that a good effective strategy is often to start with a well-defined repetitive use case with a high volume. So instead of doing everything a little bit and trying to explore the breadth of AI, they start with one case and implement that one case really, really well. So one of our clients, for example, started with IDNV, pretty boring actually, but it is quite impactful because based on that one process, they are now able to authenticate tens of millions of calls per year, and that leads to about 15% reduction in average handling time and less waiting times. Now they're expanding into more blended intelligence services. And what they also do, and I find this really interesting because I consider it a good best practice to maybe to copy or to learn from. Before they do a handover to a human agent, they ask the caller, your approximate wait time is, I don't know, X minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. If you want, you can talk to a virtual agent now. You won't lose your place in the queue. And the interesting thing is that many people just give it a try because they have nothing to lose, right? Either that self-service thing works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, they speak to the agent anyway and they won't lose their place in the queue. And in any case, everything creates a new data point that can be used for improving those self-services. So after all, no one loses. And I think that is a really good practice to learn from productional use of things and make sure that blended intelligence is really implemented for the benefit of everyone involved, so the clients as well as the end customers.
Yeah, that's a massive upgrade over. We're happy to call you back. So now I got to hope that I'm not in the middle of something else when the phone rings with your return call. So
it's the worst.
Oh, that's good stuff. Yeah, Phil, what are you finding in terms of how those organizations are focusing, where they're focusing as they work to create and support blended teams?
I think there's three kind of phases. So I really like the example that Sebastian gave, particularly with sort of the more mature organizations having specific proof of concepts and then actually taking production data through it. That's actually the most common use case we see for the most sophisticated companies as well. Because there's nothing like real live data to test it out, not just from a technology point of view, but from a process and measurements and leadership, etc. But the three broad things I try to remind people to think about are, what is this good at? How do you sort of integrate a people-centered, blended intelligence approach? The first is sort of look and see what tasks can be automated. So with machines, so humans can focus on the more interesting strategic kind of work, right? The things that humans are good at. So very obviously from contact centers, as Roy said, it's sort of the, if it's just the break fix kind of stuff, that's all pretty straightforward to do. But then look at the second thing would be augmenting. How would you apply intelligence and algorithms to build on people's skill sets? So that would be looking at how your best agents or people are doing something, getting pattern matches, and then offering up, here's a way that somebody else in Korea did it. You may have never seen it. You may not have seen that particular approach, but here's a technique that you could try. So it's just a different, it's not taking massive amounts of volumes and crunching it. It's smaller numbers, but giving you sort of hints and ways to augment what you do. And the last thing that I think is just starting to happen, but will need a complete change in measurements and leadership and managers, is actually using machines not just to automate, not just to augment, but to discover. How do they find patterns that couldn't be found otherwise? And I think there are learnings that could be done. So the example I would use, and I don't know of a practical way to give this, but I'll give you an example, a thought experiment. If you remember when Boeing had those crashes with the 737, and the first one happened in Indonesia, and they did a root cause analysis within the country, what I would call a swarm, and they basically saw it as an issue with pilot error. A few months later, it happened in Ethiopia, and the same thing happened. It took, in the US, the FAA and the NTSB, two organizations, putting pressure on Boeing to basically say, look, that may be the issue, but find out the common cause. And that turned out, as we all know, to be software and process-related issues, right? A business case pushing through things. I think machines, over time, that's the kind of stuff that'll be phenomenal at. What we currently call the root cause analysis, which causes most engineers to, oh my God, I can't even give you the 40-page summary of what happened, because it'll take me 6 months to do. I think that's where some really cool things would come in, because that spans many, many groups, pulling data from all over the organization.
Yeah,
So,
and pattern
automate,
pattern
augment, and
recognition.
discover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And as you were talking about sort of building on people's skill sets, I think one of the ways that also extends is sort of the concept of role-based, right? And we can apply that to our customer base as well. What is the likelihood of this person who's calling in to churn if I'm let's say a cable company, based on a whole bunch of stuff that the AI can really absorb and analyze for patterns, and then apply it to other customers as well. And Phil, again, I'm going to stick with you. We look back on some of these more successful organizations' startup efforts as they're beginning this. What did they do right to lay the foundation? You've talked about culture, et cetera, but if you could go into some more detail on this, lay a foundation for optimixing, which is a new word I came up with a typo, which I kind of like, optimixing instead of optimizing, human and automated workforces before they even get to selecting a specific technology or deciding who they're going to partner with in terms of providers. What are the effective decision-making processes look like as these companies were launching a blended intelligence effort?
So I suspect Sebastian and Roy will have some very interesting answers to this. I'll give a nuanced answer, which won't cover all of it. But I think when I started talking about the paralysis that I've seen with most organizations, frozen at the starting line saying, I don't know where to start, I think a lot of it has to do with just literacy of what's available. There's so many terms that has become almost meaningless. It's like low-fat toothpaste or something. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, low-fat is good, but how does that mean with toothpaste, right? So it's the same thing. Everything is machine learning, deep learning, things like that. I think there's a lack of basic literacy. So one thing I would think that many organizations do well, not that I realize that most organizations do well, that are doing it, is just literacy, not just for the decision makers, but across. Also start explaining things around being transparent. So if it's a particular use case you're going to try and test out, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the data sets coming from? Then also take a lot of pain. They also take a lot of pains in explaining how do the algorithms come up with the decisions? How are they tuned and fine-tuned? Is it based on one person's opinion, many people's opinion, right? People want to understand why. And then perhaps most importantly, how will the decisions be used? Because if we're talking about augmenting, it's machines giving us things that we can't get or they can do better than us to give us more input, removing noise, and giving us clarity. How is it going to be used? So that's things like bias and all sorts of things there. But yeah, I'll stop because there's other stuff I could go on and on about, but I suspect I'd love to hear what Sebastian and Roy have to say.
Yeah, that's the problem with these webinars is every single question we address, we could probably talk to all day long. So, Roy, if you could chime in on this.
I think one of the things that surfaced a lot in my conversations with various organizations is understanding the kind of data and the amount of data needed to make it all work. And as we've been discussing, sometimes it's one very specific thing or an interesting data collection point that can really make the difference for organizations. So understanding the data and having good data governance and having sharing practices in the organization is super important. And those who have had those have definitely got a little bit of a head start. Another thing that we're kind of glossing over a little bit, but having we talked a little bit about tool selection, but there's also in the process of doing that, you have to think about partner selection, right? Who do we want to partner with to help us make this effective within our organization? And making sure that anybody that we're going to do business with is more than a provider. And those organizations who have been able to partner with an organization that works with them to accomplish those organizational goals has been very beneficial to organizations that I've seen. So that's a big contributor to success is not only the tool itself, but how people are committed to the tool. And Sebastian mentioned a couple of things earlier on that I wanted to just touch on, and that is commitment. There's buy-in and there's commitment, and that happens within the organization and also within the organization's relationships with its various partners. Buy-in says, okay, you can go ahead and do that. Commitment is saying, we're going to do this, and here's how we're going to do it. And that is super important to have that kind of commitment top down so that you are making decisions based on an organizational goal.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In a breakfast context, the chicken has buy-in, the pig is committed, right? I don't know if that joke is familiar with everybody. If it's not, I apologize for pulling in. Sebastian, can you talk to us a little bit about where these successful organizations get started, how they start correctly?
Yeah, one key element to a right start is really setting the right priorities. Once again, don't go too broad, but focus on those things, on some things, and do them really well. And those projects are typically chosen with all relevant stakeholders at one table, right? They, for example, in the case of agent augmentation, they look at the question, what is really the pain for the contact center agent, right? And it's maybe not what the vendor promises they can do. So you got to talk to your best agents and figure out how could their life be easier. For some organizations, accessing the knowledge database via Whisper agent, so something that listens in and fetches the right knowledge base article in real time, that can be a big game changer. And a good example for that is in B2B, right? In B2B, service agents, they are often under pressure to help people on the spot. We, for example, work with Bosch, a large manufacturing organization. They make heating systems, and their internal support desks gets call from the installation team on site, and they literally have their fingers in the heating system, and they call and they go, what is the replacement number for the ignition system on PX5 G49, right? They have hundreds of thousands of products, and it's time critical to pull the right product manual in front of the service center agent, if possible, in real time, right? That can be a game changer. In B2C, maybe it's not, because the questions are so repetitive that a skilled agent will know all the answers after 2 weeks on the job. So there, for example, automatic call summarization can be the biggest win, because that effectively saves 30 seconds per call, and that can be a big difference and a big also win in terms of job quality for those agents. So key recommendation is really to start with what is most promising and then incrementally improve over a few iterations. And Roy, you just reiterated over that, getting management commitment and understanding that we're in for the long run, that is really important. Not everything will work on the first try and will have impact on the first try, but if you decide for a technology stack that comes with the necessary support for agility and moving quickly, then you can just adjust as you run and make those gains over time.
Right, and I think it's important. We hear a lot about opening the black box, right? Because up to now, in many cases, AI was a black box. Tell us your problem. We promise we're going to solve it. You don't need to understand, how it's all happening. And I think that's part of it. But there's another black box that really needs to be considered, and that is the organizational black box. Because the problems don't start in the contact center, and they don't end in the contact center. So having a view into that entire value chain that ends up with a satisfied customer is absolutely critical. And I think all of that needs to be considered and brought into the process as these organizations are moving towards blended intelligence. So we've started to talk about this. Sebastian, from the perspective of the teams involved, the folks who actually have to make this stuff do what it does and come out with a successful outcome for all the stakeholders, what is the most important outcome of a well-executed blended intelligence strategy? How can the folks on the ground and the leadership and then the large organization measure success?
Yeah, great question. So basically, all the contact center organizations that we work with already have a ton of KPIs. And any sort of AI that comes on top will only deliver more KPIs and more numbers and numbers to crunch, right? Mm-hmm. What is important is to figure out that there's a balanced improvement in those KPIs. So what I mean, and maybe that's trivial, but a higher deflection rate sounds good. It sounds like we saved some money, but that can be actually very harmful when CSAT goes down at the same time, right? And we also see cases where the introduction of conversational AI leads to an increase in average handling time. That seems like a bad thing, but maybe that is driven by the fact that AI-powered self-service is so good that the agents now focus on more complex and demanding tasks, right? So every data point that comes out of that wonderful AI world needs to be reviewed in context of other data point. The technology, like I said, provides a ton of data, and that's not only classical contact center KPIs like average handling time, CSAT, and so on. It does, and we've heard of that earlier, it can also measure, for example, customer satisfaction implicitly by quantifying sentiment, right, and putting it in correlation to conversations. And by that, it can show friction points. It can show, for example, lag in human AI or even lag in human-to-human communication. So after all, there's really a treasure of new and mostly objective data available, qualitative and quantitative data. And many products come for these reasons, even with integrated suites to crunch that data, extract that data and learn from that, so to be able to do some data-driven management. One best practice that we would recommend is consider data analytics early in your project team and in your project setup, and that is going to enable you to drive better decisions and ensure things are going as desired and you achieve that balance of different moving KPIs.
Yeah, I think and that's the best practice beyond blended intelligence, right? I think that so many organizations today have to look at their KPIs and say, why? Where did these come from? Are they still what we should be measuring right now? Phil, what do you see in terms of how organizations can or should measure success?
I think what Sebastian ended on and what you just picked up on, I think are key. And as you said, not just for the blended intelligence side. The fundamental thing, even before we get into measures, I think is to just realize the role of managers have changed or should change. In the old days, we were enforcers. We've got to move to player coaches now, and that's a very different skill set. So historically, from the 1800s or so, we've been trained to keep trains on track and on time. That's what we do good at. If it's red or not right, we fix it, we automate, we push more things into it. The problem arises when trains go off track or we have to lay a new track like with COVID. That's where today and for the foreseeable future, this AI-powered stuff won't yet work. So that's where I think the change is. So this really good conversation you guys just had about re-looking at your KPIs and understanding how things change from the old days to today to tomorrow needs, again, judgment, creativity, leadership. And we do not coach our managers on how to move from enforcers to player coaches. Now, within that, I think there are measures that I think are easy to start with, but different. One we talked about is customer effort. Why more than CSAT or NPS? It's because I, as an agent, know how I can influence effort. I can give suggestions how to reduce it. The other one we touched on is employee effort. And I think blended intelligence, if we spend more time focusing on how we reduce employee effort, particularly across silos, that's where immense power is. which means another measure that we talk about, we call time to smile. And that is the issue from the time the customer is not smiling to when they smile again. And particularly in complex areas where it goes beyond break, fix, quick answers, which all can be automated out, where it has to go to different groups with different permissions. Every group should be looking at the time to smile. It's already 3 days old, or 3 hours, or 3 minutes. Not, hey, I've got this much time to fix it. Machines can handle that, share that, and look at it, and actually help smash silos. One other big one that we think actually is a core for knowledge and a lot of others is time to proficiency. And I think this could be one of the killer metrics. So very few organizations measure time to proficiency. And if they do, it's by passing an exam. But if you really think about it, what is proficiency? It's people in your team saying, thank God Tim is here. Thank God Sebastian's here. Thank God Roy is here. I can screw up and talk like an idiot, but they've got my back, right? And that's the most important thing. Irrespective of what it is, the team collectively can handle it. So how do you trust somebody else to do it? So we've got techniques and specific examples of how to make that happen. But time to proficiency in this fuzzy world, I think, is going to be huge. And I think with all the power of computers applied to our creativity, we can do a better. There's other things I can talk about, like our team-based measures, but I'll stop since we don't have huge amounts of time.
Yeah, where are we? Yeah, we got about 20 minutes left, so we're doing pretty well. Yeah, the time to proficiency thing is critical. It goes to training, it goes to where do we invest, et cetera. But I think you brought up the fuzziness of all this. Part of the problem is proficiency is now fuzzy because proficiency on Monday may not be proficiency on Friday. It's moving that quickly, and I think that these are the types of tools. Those are the types of trends that these tools are so valuable for, because they've just got the horsepower to make those constant.
Can I give an example of that, Tim?
Absolutely, please.
So the way that we encourage people to look at, and I think with tools you mentioned, you can get more data and more insight that we don't have today. What we suggest people start with is, okay, time to proficiency as measured by, do your teammates trust you to do critical work independently? Sounds wonderful. Like you said, Monday is one thing, Tuesday is another, or before lunch, after lunch. Every issue that comes in, particularly in complex environments, is completely different. So how do you do it? So the way we suggest is, again, start small. Ask people, okay, how do you know when somebody is ready to do something independently? And take a discrete task if you need to. What are the behaviors that they do? When did they stop asking others questions and know where to find the answers, or to interpret the information and apply the right judgment? What are those characteristics? Then you can, when you collect enough of that from different regions and cultures and levels, you start getting a baseline. Then you can go talk to managers and make sure that is something you can actually measure versus not. Right? Can they measure it versus the team do it? Then you need to talk to people like HR, because it may not be legal to ask some of these questions, or it may not make sense in Italy versus in Zimbabwe, right? So all these things can be correlated. But my point is, there are very specific step-by-step techniques that we use when we help people with time to competency, but it's all manual now. It'd be beautiful if we can pull this data with this blended technique and allow people to actually make it happen. So it goes from theory to reality in specific competencies.
And I think that really highlights, again, the concept of value chain, because not only are you going to HR for guidance, but you're also providing guidance to HR. We need problem-solving skills. We need systems thinking. And this is what that looks like, because it may not appear on a CV, but we do need to know, where are those people? How do we find them? Roy, talk to me a little bit more about measuring success in this exciting and new world of blended intelligence.
I think from a team perspective, a really important measure of success, especially in the times of the Great Resignation, as it's being called, uncertainty, financial, economic, etc., is employee retention, which is, of course, not an instant metric, but it's really important. And from the contact center perspective, I would put employee NPS, if you measure it that way, or an employee effort score, as Phil mentioned, high on the list of measures that can guide improvement. Employee experience, and in this case, agent experience, is super important in the consideration of success, right? We need to know that these people are doing the best that they can, that they're engaged, they understand the mission that they're on, and they're working toward common goals. Blended intelligence can help even there, as you know, we keep going back to the idea of the whisper help, whisper assistance, and we know that we can get that single source of truth, as it were, if we have a knowledge base that's properly configured, and we're feeding that information into a system like that. Agents can learn from it, can share that advice, and can update themselves. You know, the common complaint with change is that yesterday I knew how to do my job, today I don't. Well, okay, and sometimes people don't get the memo. But if you use that single source of knowledge fed into the ear or onto the screen of agents, everybody gets the memo. And so it can really help people stay up to date. If they're up to date and they're being consistent in their work, then they're going to feel more comfortable, and therefore their employee experience is going to benefit.
Yeah, that's interesting because if you sort of expand on the idea of NPS, the other thing that's happening here is that what your employees are telling you about working in this blended team is a direct input to improving it as we move forward. Thank you all for helping us. The three of you have added so much for that I need to think about, and my brain's hurting a little bit, and I'm sure our audience is too. But this is incredibly valuable. So thank you for helping us think through how blended intelligence adds value for contact centers and for our customers. Let's wrap up with some political advice for political. Did I just say political? No political advice here. Practical advice for our audience. Roy, as contact center leaders are exploring blended intelligence and making the case for investing, right? Because this stuff is not free. It's certainly not free. What are some of the most important questions they should be asking each other? And what are the questions they need to be ready to answer when they're making their case to other stakeholders, maybe especially the CFO?
Thanks, Tim. I think the key questions should come from the organization's data. Now, almost every organization that you look at says they're data-driven, and so few really are. Look at the data. And given that data, how are we succeeding and where are we failing? That's really a key bit of information. We try to implement this. The data says we're failing because our customers don't like it, or they're not responding to it, or whatever it happens to be. The next, then, you ask, how can technology enable and empower us to solve the problems we actually have based on that data, rather than ones that we don't have, which are maybe something that somebody wants to sell us or would like us to go chase. And then next, we need to assess what we need in terms of human data and financial resources to make the whole thing work. What do we actually need to do in order to make this all work together, and how does it fill the gaps that we actually have? I think those are the important things that people need to look at.
Phil, what top questions would you add to that list?
I would add a little bit to just a slight variation of the really good points that Roy brought up. That's around data. That's one set of questions. Second and third would be sort of measurements. And then also would be this manager going from enforcer to coach. So let's just quickly go through each of them. On the data side, I think what people don't realize is that data collection and preparation is typically the most time-consuming activities when you're developing an AI application, more so than selecting and tuning a model. So a good partner will help you with a lot of that. But just remember the data stuff, the questions that I would ask were, what data is available to me today, right? In the context that Roy asked, which is excellent. What data is not quite available, but maybe through a little bit of work, I can get it done. What data don't I have at all, but I may need in 6 months or a year? As we talked about, as Sebastian mentioned, as the KPIs change or you realize you need to rethink your KPIs. So look ahead and say, what don't I have today, but I might need, and what do I need to do now to start getting ready for that data? And then think about biases in your data as well, which we haven't had time to talk much about. That's the data set of questions. On the people and sort of measurement side, again, am I prepared to make my managers move from enforcers to player coaches? Because most of what we'll do should be coaching people. Judgment, creativity, leadership. That's not a skill set we're used to training managers on. And then the last one really would be around culture. Is my culture one where I'm focused on knowledge, capturing everything I know about the customer through all this amazing data and these blended tools? Knowledge about the employees, their pain points, their friction points, and needs of the business. And can I apply what I learn? So that's what we call a knowledge-first culture. So that's when you're really, again, taking the best of everything you've got, looking at the data side, the people and the sort of the measurement side, and then the culture of knowledge.
And I think that's critical because it can be so overwhelming, right? The amount of knowledge that this digital world makes access to or gives us access to is one thing, but actually you've got to have a culture to start from, so that you know what is going to be important. Where do you go look for more? Where do you ignore it? There's some information that's out there that perhaps we don't need to know. So that's a really, really critical consideration. And again, one that we could spend the entire hour on, and we probably will certainly before next year is out. Finally, Sebastian, we're going to give you the last word. What are your critical considerations that you advise for organizations who want to use blended intelligence to evolve from a contact center to a true customer experience center?
Yeah, I think the customer experience aspect, that is really key here, because the quality of customer service and CX, that is already a major differentiator for enterprises all over the world, right? If we look at airlines, they're all going to give you the same terrible leg room. They cost roughly the same money. They're all going to lose your luggage. But why is one better than the other? That's largely driven by the customer experience. How do they treat you if things don't go well? And I think an important question to ask when tapping into the power of AI is really, what is our vision of customer service? What's the ideal state of customer service in a few years? I think it's clear that it's not going to be, it's all bots, but it's also probably not going to be, it's 100% humans. So in that spectrum, what constitutes the perfect service experience? How does it feel? How does it look, right? How does it work? And that can drive a lot of the technology decision-making, because it helps understand, for example, is a platform right? Or should I rather go with a point solution for a quick fix, right? So this is a lot about finding the match between future forward thinking and deciding for future-proof technology. And how do you find that out? Probably don't find that out by looking too much at vendor websites. You should rather look for proven examples. You should look for trust and experience. You should talk to analysts like Gartner, who have a much broader view of the market and a really deep insight into what technology can provide today. And as I mentioned earlier, you should always consider a POC or even a kind of a vendor bake-off to get the ultimate proof of what works for you and what takes you step by step to that future of customer service.
I think that's critical, because I think it's critical for organizations to speak to their providers, their prospective providers and partners, and say, do you understand my business? So don't sell me your solution, sell me my solutions, right?
Yes,
and I think
totally
that is a very big deal. Just really briefly, as a quick aside, show me that it works. Show me that it works for my people. Show that the outcome is actually what I want for my customers. Yeah, it's huge. I do have to do one little more aside, because that's me. You mentioned, how do you differentiate airlines? Well, apparently Southwest partnered with Guitar Center, and they loaded a flight from the West Coast to Hawaii, and everybody got a ukulele, and then they had ukulele lessons. And by the time they landed in Honolulu, everyone apparently was a ukulele master. So that's just, I'm not sure that AI came up with that. That's where the human piece really does come in. So we just have a couple
need
of
a professional musician like Roy to be there to be playing as well, right? He's actually a recorded musician, so.
That's right, Roy and Sebastian. So yeah, and that's a great name. Actually, I think we already have a band very similar to that name. Let's see, we've got just about 5 minutes here, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions that have come in. And I'll just see, we'll go in order of Sebastian, Roy, Phil on the first one, if that's okay. How does AI specifically help agents? What did those features look like? That's a very good question. So Phil, if you'll start us off. Oh, I'm sorry, who's starting off for me? I probably screwed up the order.
Sebastian would be here.
Okay,
Sebastian,
good.
please.
I'll keep it short to leave some room for the others. So what do those features look like? On a high level, they can be grouped by pre-call, in-call, and post-call. What happens pre-call is often the warm handover, so preparation of what is going on, call summaries, sentiment, so that the agents can be on the spot when taking over the conversation. In-call, we've spoken about the whisper agent, next best actions, knowledge-based retrievals, some kind of transactional elements. That's something that can really speed up the case handling. And post-call, there are things like call summarization, follow-up scheduling, and a lot more. Some of these are use case specific. So next best action is very different for airlines than for utility providers, for example. Others are agnostic. There's a huge variety and really a place for the whole value chain of the agent's work in terms of agent augmentation.
And again, important to know what you're looking for and ask for proof of concept. Yeah.
100%.
Phil.
I really like the way that Sebastian framed it in those three areas, because really nobody wants to feel like an idiot when they're speaking to somebody else, right? If you're the face of the company, you need to have some context on a lot of areas. So I think the way he framed it was really good. The only other piece I'd say is that if you build a culture of knowledge first, there should be one additional part, which is how can I leave what I found in a better place for the next person every time I touch it? Mm-hmm. So the leadership's job is to create that culture, but I think the tool's job would be then to make it easy to identify the knowledge gaps and do something about it just a little bit so the next person can get better and then machines can help even more. So that'll be one extra part, I'd say. It's a so what in addition to just the interaction.
Yeah, that's a very, very important consideration. We didn't talk a lot about that, but knowledge management is such a huge piece of this for sure. And how does that get passed on? I think a lot about it. How do you learn? You learn by doing the grunt work. Well, if the machines take away the grunt work, how are we going to learn? And I think that this is part of that answer. Roy, can you chime in here, please?
Yeah, I think that it's pretty much been covered, but just to add something to what Phil said, if you want to get experience at feeling like an idiot when you're talking to other people, just sit in my shoes, for a day. I certainly feel like that all the time. But that's just it. As I was talking about earlier about employee experience, we can be bolstered by the amount of knowledge and information we can get from some of these tools, especially things like the Whisper Agent and on-screen assistants. And I think it's really important for us to be able to lean on the tools that we have provided in AI and so forth to get on with it, and also not to lose a sense of the customer on the other end of the phone or on the other end of the screen, the chat, whatever it happens to be. That we understand where they're coming from. We know something about them because we've got the data that has been created about them previously or on the during the particular conversation we're having. So we begin to understand the people we're talking to better and how to relate to them. And also some of what AI can do is assist even with that. It can make recommendations in terms of sentiment. Maybe I should say something this way rather than that way because of the way this person responded to these types of conversations previously. So it's just absolutely astounding the type of assistance we can get.
Yeah, that's great. And let's see, we're right at the top of the hour, so we don't have time for any more questions. Thank you to everyone in the audience who joined us. I know I got a whole lot out of this, and I trust that you all did too. A huge thank you to Phil, to Roy, and to Sebastian. And thanks again to Cognigy for sponsoring today's session. As a reminder, you will all receive a follow-up email that will include a link to view a recording of today's presentation. So if you found this event useful, please share that link with your colleagues. Once you leave the event, a short survey will pop up in your browser window. We'd appreciate it very much if you would share your feedback on this webinar. It helps us to tailor all of our programs to your interests and make sure that we to make the best use of your time that you've been so generous and shared with us. So to everyone, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Tim. Have a great day too. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.